So a little while ago, we saw the release of the second film from the relatively new studio Skydance Animation, titled Spellbound. Coming out 2 years after their first effort, we have seen relatively little fanfare and excitement this time around compared to what we saw for Luck. At first, this was rather odd for me, as after all, this one's on Netflix and thus has a far wider reach than Luck did, which would have debuted on Apple TV+. When Luck was coming out, whilst it wasn't getting the same attention as the market-leading studios like Disney, Pixar, Illumination, it was still prominent. Maybe it's because no matter what you think of John Lasseter, the reality is that he was a huge figure in the 20-year golden age of Pixar, and then also in the Disney revival era where they turned things around after a number of flops and disappointments to have their most successful era of all time. So I guess the interest was there to see if he could do it again. Could he build this studio out of nothing and rock it to the top once more? Could he craft a studio that would become a new contender to the big names in only a handful of years after he'd been fired? The answer was no, as the movie was mid and it faded away very quickly. So I suppose in hindsight, that may play some sort of role as to why this film has seemingly just gone completely under the radar. The first movie had the benefit of a hype train behind it. But this one's now just like any other straight-to-streaming film. It needs to work a lot harder to get the same attention and interest. It especially needs to be well regarded and get good reviews as well to build some momentum, as well as good streaming numbers. Now, in terms of its watch time, it's done decently well for itself. From November 18th to November 24th, it racked up 8.5 million views, placing it third on the Netflix top 10 for that week. I don't know if it had legs beyond that because the data isn't out yet as of writing this. But it probably didn't crash out of the top 10 just yet. Since it has no real hype around it though, I wouldn't be shocked if it only lingers there for that week beyond that, and then fades away. But these are decent numbers all things considered. Narrowly defeated Rise of Gru, which got 7.5 million views that week, and has been in the English language top 10 for 8 weeks running. Although that being said, it's probably not a good sign if your new film is only slightly beating out an older film, but I think that is an industry-wide problem. People want sequels and nostalgia, and they avoid new content, at least in an animated context. Honestly, it's probably a good thing that this is straight to streaming, as more people will be willing to give it a chance, as opposed to paying for a ticket. My god, can you imagine the massacre? Moana 2 would have slaughtered its box office, so I think it's for the best. So we've seen commercial success, but what about critical response? What do critics and audiences think? Well, sorry to say, they don't seem to think it was any good. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 44% critical score and a 52% audience score. Now that's a very low set of scores, and I'll be honest, I'm not really sure it deserves scores quite that low. At the same time though, it's just not really a good film either. It was very hit or miss. At times it's exciting and fun, and then at other times I'm sitting there wondering what the hell it's supposed to be. I think the audience score is one that's more fair. 52%. Critics are, as usual, perhaps a bit too harsh, but there is a lot to dislike. When you talk about an animated film, obviously the first thing you're going to want to know is, does it look good? Is the animation good? Most of the time these days, this is going to be a bit of a trick question. Gone are the days where there's going to be a major cinematic release from pretty much any animated studio that's going to look actively bad. Sometimes there might be criticism for the style that's been chosen, but overall it's largely positive across the board in terms of quality, and usually people can acknowledge that at the very least. Here though, something felt off for me. I don't really know what it is, but it just felt rather unsettling looking at the world that had been created. The buildings, the settings, the landscapes, the colours, the quality itself is good. I'll acknowledge that, and it would be unfair not to. But there is something about this whole film's visual that just screams generic. Seriously, this has got to be the most generic fantasy world I've ever seen, to the point that I was a little bit suspicious that they'd been using AI in the design process. It is the blandest, most unimaginative fantasy kingdom I've ever seen put to screen. It was never enough to turn me off completely, but it also took me out of it every step of the way. The world design, it reminds me of that terrible Russian Pinocchio, but with more money behind it that allowed it to look high quality. No amount of money, though, can de-bland your concept. It's not about money, it's about creative vision, and I think in terms of that, this film is bankrupt. I do want to stress, though, that this is largely relative to the film's environments and settings. The character designs themselves are rather fun and have a lot of colour and visual pizzazz, but apart from that, it's lacking. It's really the first time in ages I've walked away from a film and just utterly disliked the visual side of things. It's a shame as well because you can tell the actual quality's there, they just had bad blueprints to build off. So now we move on from the visuals to the music. So this was a musical film with singing. It shouldn't have been though. I will admit the songs themselves were fun in the moment, even if none of them are stuck around in my head at all in the time since I've watched it, but it's just that this film didn't need them. And in fact, they bogged down the actual narrative flow to the point that every time a fresh song would come on, I would just sigh. It wasn't needed. Also, like I said, it was fine when I watched it, but also so forgettable. A weaker effort from Alan Menken here, which was a shame to see. Just a bit of a dud, really. But that's not the only side of the audio we gotta look at. You also have to look at the voice acting side of things. And this film has a damn stacked cast. In the lead role, we have Rachel Zegler, but then we also have Nicole Kidman as her mum, Javier Bardem as her dad, there's John Lithgow, Nathan Lane, just a really big name cast. And I do have to wonder how much this film cost to make overall, because it can't have been cheap with voice talent such as this. With such a stacked cast, you might even be forgiven for thinking, oh, they're going to go for drawing power over actual voice acting skill, but everybody played their roles to perfection. There's not a single weak link in the cast. And I really want to hone in on John Lithgow as Bolinar. Dude is such a good actor, such a good voice talent. I loved him as Lord Farquaad, I love him in this. And if we're being real, the voice acting quality carries this movie and carries it hard. If the cast was any lesser at all, there would be not much left to enjoy in this thing. So we've got great voice acting, a weak score, and what feels like an AI-generated world. Man, guess we're really narrowing down why this film's done so poorly across the board in terms of opinions, aren't we? But you know what else is important? The story, the narrative side of things, the script. And so that's what we'll discuss next. Set in the magical kingdom of Lumbria, Spellbound follows the character of Alien, Princess of Lumbria, who for the past year has had to deal with the fact that her parents, the king and queen, have been transformed into monsters whilst journeying through the dark forest of eternal darkness. While she has the support of her close advisors and a select group of palace guards, the status quo is clearly starting to wear away at her. She no longer has the time to hang out with her friends, she has to secretly rule the kingdom with her ministers, whilst also hiding the truth of her parents from everybody in the kingdom. Plus, her ministers want to crown her as queen and give up on turning the two back because they view them as a lost cause and see that the kingdom itself is falling into chaos without them. Meanwhile, the general of the army is also breathing down their necks as the king and queen haven't been seen in a year and everybody's getting a little bit suspicious. In desperation, Alien summons the mysterious oracles of the moon and sun who live in the dark forest, and whilst they tell her that they can fix things, they end up running away after being attacked by the monsters. After an accident where Alien forgets to properly lock the cages, her parents escape into the city and they wreak havoc, forcing Alien to flee with them into the forest, with one of her ministers, Bolinar, accidentally getting body swapped with Alien's pet rodent, Fink. Our group of four make their way into the forest to meet with the oracles, who tell them that in order to fix things, they must visit the Lake of Light. On they go, and along the way after trials and tribulations, the king and queen regain the ability to speak, and then fully remember who they are and what happened to them. They remember that the reason they were transformed by the dark magic of the forest was because of a nasty fight they had, and that in truth their marriage had been falling apart long before. They no longer wanted to be married because it was creating a toxic home life that Alien had subconsciously picked up on, even if she was in denial about it. When they tell her they want to separate, she freaks out and is almost consumed by the darkness herself, and so they have to work together once more to prove that although their family dynamic's changing, their priority is and always will be her. That they love her and none of this is her fault, it's just the way things have to be. At the end, we have a year time skip so we don't get bogged down in the growing pains of the new family, and it's proven that in the end, the divorce was for the best. That the parents function far better as friendly co-rulers than they ever did as romantic partners. I'll be honest, the best thing about the film is that ending, where it's not all sunshines and rainbows and reunions. It shows that sometimes a family separation is for the best and can make things better for everybody. I liked that ending, and it really does make the story come together with all the different hints littered throughout the movie, through the dialogue and the story beats. And I think it makes it stand out from a lot of other films that rarely traverse a similar path. It's really just a shame that the majority of the rest of the story is completely a painted-by-the-numbers road adventure film. It feels very generic. And whilst there's fun to be had along the way, the story quality itself made it feel like it was a made-for-streaming show that had been smooshed together to form a film. Kind of like Moana 2, really. The different phases of the story didn't really feel all that connected. It felt like chapters. In fact, I think it would have worked so much better and been more enjoyable as shorter episodes. But that being said, the writing is not without virtue. Whilst the overarching story besides the interesting divorce angle did feel bland, derivative, and lacking in imagination, the actual dialogue and the character interactions were really well done. And I thought the humour really did hit. The jokes were funny. So, yeah, honestly, it probably does deserve its poor reception. It had an interesting ending, good acting and snappy jokes and dialogue, but that really doesn't mean all that much if the plot stinks, the music is unwanted, and the world design is bland. It should have been better. It really should have been, and it's a shame. And so with all that being said, not much else to say other than these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Spellbound, if you've seen it? Did you like it? Hate it? If you haven't seen it, will you? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.